Hi, everybody. How you guys doing tonight? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Yvette Moy, and I'm the University of Washington's Director of Public Lectures, and I'm so happy to welcome you this evening to our first lecture of spring quarter. We always struggle with audiences in the spring because the sun comes out, and so that's our biggest competition, but we know you're watching us on the live stream, so thank you. Tonight, we are going to welcome the University of Alabama's Associate Professor and Associate for the Office of Access and Engagement, Dr. Bertha Hidalgo. Professor Hidalgo will be introduced by the UW's Associate Professor in the School of Public Health and the Director of MPH Core, Dr. India Ornelas. This evening, we want to thank a few people who helped make this evening possible. The School of Medicine was a great partner in this, along with the School of Public Health. We also want to acknowledge Professor Jessica Chen, who's formerly from the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And of course, where would I be without my assistant director, Kate Golden, who keeps the wheels from falling off of this amazing thing we call the Office of Public Lectures. Before we bring everybody on stage, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. And the first is, if you haven't done so already, could you please turn off or silence your cellular devices? We ask that you refrain from video or audio recording this evening's talk. It is being live streamed currently and recorded, and you'll be able to find that on the Office of Public Lectures YouTube channel. We also ask you to refrain from taking photographs while our speakers are on stage. It's just very distracting, and it's hard for people to concentrate. We have two ways this evening that you can ask questions. The first one is if you're joining us via live stream or you're feeling shy in the room, you can send them in on Slido. There's a QR code that will pop up eventually right there. And you can scan it with your phone, and you can also check your registration reminder for that QR code, and just send in your question that way. And you can also upvote questions as well. The other option, for those of us who are feeling brave, who are in the room this evening with us, you can come to the microphone here at stage right, and the only request that I make is that you ask your question in the form of a question. So that's very helpful for everybody. And with those little instructions, I'm going to ask and welcome Dr. India Ornelas to the stage. Yay. Yay.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. Happy to be here. I'm India Ornelas from the Department of Health Systems and Population Health in the School of Public Health at the University of Washington, and so excited to have Dr. Bertha Hidalgo with us here today. She is an associate professor with tenure in the Department of Epidemiology and the Associate Dean for the Office of Access and Engagement at the University of Alabama at Birmingham School of Public Health. She also serves as the president of the American College of Epidemiology. Dr. Hidalgo earned degrees from Stanford University, the University of Southern California, and the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Her research centers on cardiovascular disease with expertise in genetic epidemiology and dissemination science. She has over 100 publications and received funding from the National Institutes of Health, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the American Heart Association. In 2019, she received the RWJF Early Career Achievement Award, and in 2023, the Hometown Hero Award at the White House. She is also committed to public-facing science communication, translating complex health research into accessible information for diverse audiences. Please welcome tonight's guest, Professor Bertha Hidalgo, to the stage.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and it's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for those that made the trek into the building. Let me put my water down. And for those of you that are online, thank you also for joining. I appreciate all of the support. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit about the work that I do, and I'm hopeful that you'll walk away with something new learned. So I have no disclosures to share today. A notice of gratitude, though, for the University of Washington. It is a true honor to be here, and several groups within. So the Graduate School Public Lectures Office, UW School of Public Health, HPOP, also all of the faculty, students, and staff that were supportive of this visit, the Endowed Lecture Program, and a very special thanks to my colleague Jessica Chen and Yvette Moy, who has facilitated so much. India Ornelas also had, so many people that have just been so instrumental in making this visit very special. So tonight is not a lecture. I am used to giving very scientific talks, and I was very intentional in making sure that, well, I hope no one will fall asleep today. I can't guarantee that's not going to happen. But what I'm hoping to share with you is a set of stories. So I hope you'll indulge me. There are 5 stories that I plan to tell today, my story, so you'll learn a little bit about me. The story of women's health, the work that we're doing, unlocking the secrets, the epigenome, pregnancy, and then a story of hope. Let's start with my story. This is me in 4K. Not like high dimension 4K, but like pre-kindergarten. I was this little spark of light. I really was. So energetic, so enthusiastic, just highly gregarious, very curious, very smart, if I have to say so myself. A first generation of Mexican background, first generation, all things. My parents did not achieve schooling greater than the middle school level. It was amazing to me to be able to attend high school and college and grad school and attain so much that they were unable to experience. In fact, I took an Uber drive this morning, and I was looking out. We were driving by downtown Seattle, and I looked out the window, and there were these high-rise buildings. And I remembered driving on the 5 freeway in LA, looking out the window at like the age of 8 and thinking, wow, I wonder what it's like to be out there. And today I'm here. In 1996, I applied to college against my father's will. My dad wanted me to go to the local community college, and I was told by the people at my high school that I should apply to college, and so I did. And no one suggested that I apply to community college except for my dad. He said it was 20 minutes away. It was what we could afford. I applied to 8 universities. All 8 admitted me. I had a full ride at UCLA, but Stanford, everyone said you have to go there. And the person who worked in the finance department, or like the loans department somewhere, financial aid, called my dad on the phone and said, you have to let her come here. We will figure something out. And so off I went. And he cried the day, I'd never seen my father cry. He cried the day he dropped me off. And in truth, I cried too. I went to Stanford. I followed my time there with 2 years as a post-baccalaureate. I was in training, doing research at the National Institutes of Health. I was in Dr. Tony Fauci's Laboratory of Immunoregulation doing HIV research. I then went on to get a master's in epidemiology and biostatistics. I moved back to LA. Early in my career, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I then learned research really piqued my interest, and I thought research was the way to go. So I got my master's. I then went to UAB. I got a PhD in epidemiology. I did a postdoc in statistical genetics. I got an assistant professorship. I got promoted to associate professor. I did a stint at UCSF in a fellowship in dissemination and implementation science. I then became associate dean in 2023. And along this journey, what revealed to me was a gap between the incredible science that I was privy to, but that we were ineffective in communicating to people that were outside the quote-unquote ivory towers. There was a very slow drift of assimilation. The academic ascent is rarely experienced as a loss until one day you notice the distance. And that's what was happening to me. I was becoming very assimilated in academic culture, and I was losing the ability to tell my parents and my aunts and my cousins exactly what it was that I was doing and translate it in a way that they would intake the information and be empowered to make decisions for themselves. I did not know how to speak regular English or Spanish when it came to science. We do the public a disservice in academia by not learning to code switch. We had incredible science, and I was losing the ability to reach people. I also learned that there were gaps. When I was young, my sister fell and had a pretty bad injury to her face. And I vividly remember my dad saying, "Do not call the ambulance." It was later that I learned that we could not afford an ambulance ride. We had to wait until the urgent care clinic opened the next morning because we could afford urgent care, but we could not afford $500 or whatever it was for the ambulance to come. But there were gaps beyond that. There were gaps in my understanding, in people's understanding, but also gaps in who we were including in the research that I was learning about and actually involved in doing. This brings me to the story of women's health. Women's health is built on incomplete evidence. Symptoms differ, risk accumulates differently, and timing matters also. Who was missing from the data is a question that arose in 1993. Women in high-risk minoritized populations, but particularly women, were systematically underrepresented in research for decades. The shift happened with the National Institutes of Health Revitalization Act of 1993, which required inclusion of women and minority populations in federally funded research. 1993. Decades of research before that proceeded without the accurate inclusion of women. Inclusion itself is not enough. It does not equate to understanding. Currently, in early phase trials, women remain underrepresented. Birthing persons remain underrepresented in all research. There are population differences that we cannot study. We can't study them. Some clinical decisions may be based on evidence that doesn't fully represent the whole. My group and others have published on the struggle that we experience in the inclusion of women and minoritized populations in research, in my space, genomic research. Articles that were written as recently as March of 2024, why we know so little about women's health. So who is represented in research? Who is in the data that shapes what we know? Well, it's not a lot of the people that represent the entire population. The composition of clinical trial populations shapes medical knowledge and its gaps. And sex-based analyses also are deficient in racial inclusion, representation in research. It's not just an equity issue, it's a representation issue. We know that biology is not identical, but people have been quoted as saying that the only difference between sex, male, female, is reproductive organs, that's where it stopped. So now I'm going to tell you a sub-story within this story, the Ambien story. Ambien is a sleep medication. Anyone familiar with it? Okay, yes. And so it works by calming the brain so that you can fall asleep. Well, after you take it, your body has to metabolize it. And what we learned was that women metabolized this drug differently than men. So much so that they were falling asleep at red lights because they were taking it to go to sleep, and it still hadn't fully processed and left their bodies by the next morning where they were headed to work. The reason? Clinical trials for Ambien primarily included men. There was an underrepresentation of women. This corrected an assumption that men and women were equal and that the only things that differed between them were reproductive organs. We didn't discover a new problem, right? We're correcting assumptions as we go. I'm going to tell you a separate story. This story is of Tracy. So Tracy inherited 2 mutations in the gene PCSK9. The gene was essentially turned off. How did we get there? So Tracy walked into a clinic one day, and she had a cholesterol level, LDL, of 14. Does anyone know if an LDL of 14 is a good number? So not for people that are not on medication. People who are not on medication struggle to have an LDL of 100. So 14 was like, that's wild for this person to be walking around with an LDL of 14. She happened to be participating in the Dallas Heart Study. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that study. Investigators in this study asked, is she the only one? And what they found was that there were other people that also had these mutations on the gene PCSK9. Basically, minor little changes in the gene that changes the way the gene operates. Outliers are signals, but in this case, Tracy, a woman, was an outlier in data that was supposed to be looking for signals related to heart disease. Tracy's stories matter because these mutations ended up leading us to PCSK9 inhibitors, which are lipid-lowering, cholesterol-lowering drugs. And these were since marketed to help millions of people achieve cholesterol levels that are within range of normal. So PCSK9 inhibitors, she participated in the study, I think it was like 2005 or 7, something like that. The Dallas Heart cohort was initiated in 2003. In 2017, we were figuring out how to implement PCSK9 as clinical treatment in practice. And so it's about 14 to 17 years from discovery to implementation. And you're sort of working off the assumption that you're gonna have, by chance, the right people in the studies to make these discoveries. In this case, a woman, Tracy. So human biology teaches us that real people reveal what's biologically possible, that representation matters, and that genetics also has an impact. So I'm a genetic epidemiologist. I hope that I can convince you that there's a lot to learn from our genetic code. Discovery starts with people, but only if you include everyone. I would be remiss not to remind us that it is National Public Health Week. Public health has extended life expectancy through many discoveries, not just one. Public health wins don't always go noticed. The water that you drink, the roads that you're on, seatbelts are a big public health win. Airbags, driving laws, vaccines. Like for smallpox and polio, we have eliminated and eradicated diseases that caused major life-altering conditions to people. Smoke-free air is another major public health win. Fewer heart attacks, less lung disease, cleaner spaces, safer food and milk. This one, we have a lot of recalls right now, actually, incidentally, but nevertheless, we have much safer water and milk and food due to pasteurization and regulations and regular monitoring. Iodized salt is one that I never think about, but that is also another really big win. And so things like removing lead from paint and gasoline led to better brain development. There are things that we have achieved with very little inclusion, but also attention to what impact it has for the general population. So that leads me to story 4, which is the work. A lot of work remains to be done. There are students in the audience, there are faculty in the audience, there are practitioners in the audience, there are community members in the audience. We all have work to do. Next week is Black Maternal Health Week. Black women are among the most affected by maternal morbidity and mortality in the US. In fact, related to pregnancy-related deaths, Black women are most afflicted by maternal mortality compared to white and other race ethnic groups like American Indian and Alaska Native. In fact, it's about 3 times as many women that are identified as Black women that die due to pregnancy and other related conditions. But the timing really matters. It's not just during pregnancy that there's a high-risk period, it's actually the period after pregnancy and delivery that also matters. So for example, hypertensive disorders. So when you have high blood pressure during pregnancy or just in life, that can affect your risk for having a complication during pregnancy, but also increases your risk for adverse events afterwards, like chronic hypertension and other cardiovascular disease outcomes, including hemorrhage and infection. What's most striking is that 80% of maternal deaths are preventable, according to the CDC. Some of the work that we're doing is in this study called the Chronic Hypertension in Pregnancy Study. This study recruited women with mild chronic hypertension into a trial that sought to treat their chronic hypertension in pregnancy and see if it was safe to treat the hypertension during pregnancy. If you want to read more about this, my colleague, and he doesn't know he's my mentor, but he's my mentor, Dr. Alan Tita, published the findings from this trial in the New England Journal of Medicine. And what we have done is taken this as a platform for all of the genomics work that I and others lead in this study. So it was an open label, randomized controlled trial. There were over 70 sites that participated in this. It was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And what it did was allow us to better understand how treating blood pressure, high blood pressure for birthing persons during pregnancy affects both the person and the baby. And what we found was that there were really good results. And so there were fewer bad outcomes after treatment for both the person and the baby. And there was no growth impairment for the baby, which was really fantastic. And it changed guidelines immediately. I mean, the paper was published and practice was changing almost the next day. It was really impressive. One of the major outcomes of this study was whether or not women developed preeclampsia. So for those unfamiliar with preeclampsia, it's the major topic that I study in women's health. It's a really serious condition. You end up with high blood pressure. You may start with high blood pressure, but then it gets even higher. There's organ damage that can happen if there's preeclampsia during the pregnancy, and there's a risk to both the mom and the baby. The problem is that we're often really reactive to the condition. In public health, we're about prevention. That takes a lot of work. So there's an opportunity here to detect whether women get preeclampsia or not by looking for signals. They call epidemiologists disease detectives. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that. And so we take that to heart in our work here. And so one of the first questions I asked was, well, what causes preeclampsia? Well, it starts with the placenta. Oftentimes in women's health and women's health outcomes, there's a lot of blaming that happens. Well, you didn't eat this. Well, you didn't do this. There's no blame to be placed here. It is a condition that we don't quite understand why it happens. We can have two people with equal blood pressures walk into a room, same race, same age, same BMI, and one ends up with preeclampsia and one does not. And we don't fully understand why. It's not the baby's fault. It's probably related to some placental dysfunction, but there has to be a signal that we can rely on. And so that's what we're looking for. Things like prior history. Is this the first pregnancy? Maybe there were other chronic conditions. Is there an age at which people are at greater risk? But one of the things that we know is that Black women in the US are 60% more likely to develop preeclampsia than white women. I showed you the mortality data already, so this is on top of that. And they're also more likely to face more severe complications. Part of what we're also ineffective at capturing are the intangibles. Things like, do they have equal access to care? Are they being listened to when they go and say, something doesn't feel right? There's also a weathering effect, which is sort of the effect of stress on the body. Higher chronic condition rates, there's more blood pressure, more diabetes, more other conditions that really affect the person's health. But some of these are systemic racism, social determinants of health, right? Where do they live? Do they have enough income? Is there food access? There are social determinants of health as well, right? So how much money do they make? Are they able to afford the copay to go and visit regularly for prenatal visits? There's biological weathering, which is accelerated cellular aging, and I'll talk a little bit about this as well. If preeclampsia is untreated, it can be fatal, both for the birthing person and the baby. So early detection saves lives. We, on our research team, but others that are in this space, are in the business of trying to prevent this condition. And we're asking, can we see it early? There's some work that is in place that has made great strides in trying to identify preeclampsia early. So for example, you can now take a blood draw from the mom, and babies sort of release, they shed DNA into the mom's blood. And so these blood draws you can use to detect a number of other things during pregnancy. But one of the things that investigators recently discovered was that this DNA allows them to also predict which women may get preeclampsia. It's not in clinical practice yet. It hasn't been validated. It's a technology that's new. It's a relatively new discovery. But it is one step towards early detection. In our study, what we're trying to determine is if there are other things that we can use to predict who will get preeclampsia and who will not. So that brings me to story number 4, which is the epigenome. A lot of people don't know about the epigenome. It is my favorite topic to talk about. It is genetics, but not genetics, in that we do also study the genetic code. But has anyone watched Stranger Things? Okay, do you know the Christmas lights? So the Christmas lights would turn on when the Demogorgons were coming. I don't know if you remember that part, but in Will's house, the lights would sort of like the Christmas lights, and that's how they also figured out, like when the monsters were coming. And so I like to think of the epigenome sort of as these Christmas lights that get turned on all across the genetic code, all across your genetic strands. So what turns them on? Exposure to things leads to certain lights along the genome to turn on, and it creates patterns. And so here I describe that the DNA is the script and the epigenome is the director, because what happens is if enough Christmas lights turn on within any given gene in your genetic code, those lights can turn off the gene and it completely disrupts the function of the gene. So if it's a not great gene that predisposes you for a not so great outcome, the methylation may mean that you are no longer at risk. We have no idea how that really works. Okay, so we're studying epigenetics in pregnancy. The pregnancy is a stress test. There's a lot that's happening to the birthing person, but also to the baby. And methylation is dynamic. So these Christmas lights can turn on. We don't know how long they stay on. And things like stress, diet, physical activity, the pregnancy itself, may be things that cause these lights to turn on. We don't know if these lights stay on for 72 hours, if they stay on for decades. There's some evidence that they stay on for generations and that the pattern can be passed on from grandma to mom to then now the 3rd generation. But what we do know is that there's enough evidence that we can use it to detect early signals. So one of the things that we've determined is that we can also measure whether your cells are aging at a faster pace than your chronological age. And so if you're exposed to a lot of stress, if you're exposed to infections, if you're exposed to other systemic and social stressors, that we can measure how big of a change it's making to your epigenome. And so we hypothesize that epigenetic age measures, like, there are different clocks that you can use to measure this epigenetic age, may be associated with things like blood pressure and pregnancy. And we found signals so far. So women with higher blood pressure at the beginning of pregnancy, we show have cells that are older than their chronological age and are also aging faster. So the rate, right, at which they're aging faster than their chronological age. We've also seen that smoking, which is paradoxically associated with preeclampsia. That means that if you're a smoker, oftentimes people that smoke are less likely to have preeclampsia during pregnancy. And what we found in our study is actually it sort of exacerbates the condition. And so we think that maybe it's too late if you're smoking during pregnancy for it to be preventive. So just to give you a sense of how bad preeclampsia is, even though it's a somewhat rare event in the grand scheme of things, in the millions of people that give birth every single year, preeclampsia does increase your risk for heart failure by 4 times. Once you've had it, you are 15 to 20% more likely to have it again. You are 2 times as likely to have coronary heart disease. And for Black women, 60% higher rate than other race ethnicities. So there are some risk factors, some things that predispose you. We've talked a little bit about this, right? Like, have you had preeclampsia before? Are you able to report it to physicians early enough so that you can get treatment for it? If you report it, are you listened to so that people understand whether or not you need to be treated and so that we can do something about the problem? There are a lot of opportunities for work in this space. And I argue that we're not yet doing enough to ensure that all women have a reduced chance at suffering from preeclampsia, but other conditions that also affect women in general in pregnancy. And still, I have hope. Things are really hard right now. Like really, really hard. Really, really hard for a variety of reasons. If you're in an academic setting, there are funding gaps that are affecting women's health research. It remains chronically underfunded, and we're losing our ability to include certain types of persons in our research as well. There are also data gaps. The advances that we have made and are celebrating during National Public Health Week are fantastic. We can't ignore those, but there's so much work to be done and people to include in our research studies as well. Translation gaps. I admit there are probably things I said today that went completely over people's heads. I probably lost you at some point. I am a work in progress. I am a student of science communication. I am learning how to better communicate my science so that it reaches more people, so that you don't walk away from here and say, I have no idea what she was talking about midway through this talk, right? I would love for the opportunity to give a talk where it's like reading Dr. Seuss to people. I'm not quite there yet. But I think we do a poor job in general as academics, physicians, scientists, at communicating in a way that people understand. And so then that leads to translation gaps. But yet the field is moving, nevertheless. New tools, new data, new voices at the table, even though that is currently at risk as well. The questions that we're able to ask would not have been possible a decade ago. We have new tools and new technology and new ways in which we can look at science. Even just AI has changed the way in we're operating these days. So hope to me is evidence. And that sounds a little bizarre. It isn't just optimism. My hope isn't wishful thinking. It's really grounded in data. We have historical periods in which we thought it would not get better than it was at that time, and yet here we are with infections completely eradicated and eliminated. We are at risk for losing elimination status for some of them. But nevertheless, also bringing on a new generation of scientists who can help us think of new ways in which we can ask questions. So we've seen change before, and diseases that were once considered inevitable are now preventable. This is what I hope for preeclampsia. Outcomes that were once fatal are now survivable. We have made significant progress in public health and medicine. So hope, in my opinion, and I hope you walk away feeling this way too, is that it's a rational response to what science has already made possible. This presentation makes the case that optimism is grounded in evidence, and it's one of the most powerful tools in medicine and public health. Patterns can be measured. You too can be a disease detective. And measurement matters. So when you are asking questions, I always prompt myself to think, who has not been included? What do we need to ensure that all are included and represented? Because ultimately, the translation of our findings are dependent on who we include at the outset. We also know that the body leaves clues. So the epigenome is one way in which the environment that affects our body, that our bodies are exposed to, are now signaling to people like me, genetic epidemiologists, that something is wrong, that our biology is being affected. So biology has a pattern. Science can read the story, and the future isn't fixed. Disparities are not destiny. We have the opportunity to close the gaps and be able to ensure that there's hope for systems to be changed. And so hope is evidence because we've already seen what happens in practice, in science, in systems, and people come together to change outcomes. I work in public health. Some in this room do too, where we deal with really big, really messy, slow-moving problems. Chronic disease, health inequities, systems that resist change. And it would be really easy to become cynical. I said I wasn't going to talk about COVID, but here I go. So in the first 2 years of the pandemic, I did a lot of science communication, hopefully some effective, and I became really disillusioned with how little I felt like I was achieving. I did not feel like the science that we were developing was making the change that I hoped. And so I cried because I thought, well, then what is this for? What are we doing this for? If we're working so hard on these discoveries and we're trying to save lives and we can't get the science to the people who need it, and then when we do, it's not met with the enthusiasm that I hoped that it would, it was deflating, it was disheartening, it was discouraging, it was all of the dis words. What keeps me going is that there is an opportunity to think that every system is made of people. And people change when they feel seen. People change when they feel supported and when they feel capable. And we have a lot of work to do in public health and medicine and science to ensure that people feel seen and that they feel heard and that they feel capable. And so, I do have hope. Some days it's harder than others. I think lately it's been very hard. But it mirrors what I truly believe about public health and our ability to do good. So I challenge you to practice embracing hope as a feel-good exercise, to infuse or inject hope into the work that you do, to bring people to the table, to encourage people to participate in clinical trials if you can assure them that you can lead in a way that will be of justice to those that are participating. Hope is really a recalibration, and it provides us an opportunity to do good at a time where we could all really benefit from doing good. So with that, I think I'll close and offer an opportunity for some question and answer. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope I didn't go way over time.
Thank you so much, Bertha. That was amazing. Is this on? You gave us so much to think about, and I loved ending on that hopeful, inspiring us to embrace hope. And you know I needed it. I was being a little cynical earlier, so.
No, and
I felt that.
not
That
at
was
all.
a message for me.
No, not at all.
No, not in a bad way, in a good way. You made so many great points around representation in science and in studies. I just thought I would kick us off with a question, and then we'll see if there's any questions online. Okay, and we'll open it up to questions here in the room. But, one of the reasons why we often don't have great representation in studies is because of this history of harm and that we've done to certain communities in science, and they have a rightful reason to mistrust us. And so I was just curious, in your research, it sounds like you're doing research with Black women. How do you make them feel seen and heard and safe in your research projects? What are you doing when you recruit participants into your studies to help repair some of that?
Yes, thank you for that, for highlighting that and reminding us that there have been so many injustices that have been imparted on so many different subgroups of our population. And so, I think that in science spaces and in academic spaces, we have created a hierarchy that inevitably excludes people that aren't part of the group. And one useful way that I think we could all benefit from moving science forward with is by including people that are part of the studies in the design of the study, right? We often take the approach that we have the best questions to ask because we're trained in science, and so therefore we must be most informed on the topic. But who's best informed than the people that are living with the very conditions that we want to study, right? Or living in the conditions that we want to study. And so there are questions that exist that we don't have to come up with. And so being inclusive of those persons from the outset, I think, is very crucial and important. And I think hopefully offers an opportunity to be seen and heard.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Anyone else like to come up?
Yep. Hi.
So I have actually a couple of questions.
Yes.
The first one is just in that page that you showed where you said of women who had this during pregnancy, 15 to 20% will have it again.
Yes.
Does that mean during another pregnancy?
Correct.
Okay, so it doesn't just mean across the lifespan.
Right, so women who have preeclampsia are more likely to have high blood pressure after delivery, like chronic high blood pressure. And then if they have another pregnancy after having had that initial pregnancy with preeclampsia, they are at increased risk for that pregnancy to also have preeclampsia or some other disorder of hypertension.
Okay.
Yes.
And in the blood test that people currently take at, say, 10 or 12 weeks of pregnancy, where they're looking at all kinds of things, when do you think it might be available that it will just be part of that blood test, that they're looking for these certain markers? And can I tell my clients now to ask for that?
That's a great question. So on average, it takes about 17 years from discovery to implementation. I don't think we're at the 17-year timeline for, so the test is an APOL1 marker test that can be, they can find it using that fetal DNA, right? But the studies are so early that this is something they still have to develop as a test and market, and then eventually put on the market, and then create clinical guidelines around it. So unfortunately not, but I think we're inching closer.
Okay.
Yes, great question.
Okay, and then my last question, there was something up there about multi-omics
Yes.
being used. What are multi-omics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are different types of ways in which we can measure things in the body and blood in particular. So, so a blood draw allows us to study your genetic code as well as the epigenome, which is what I talked about today. But the plasma from the blood allows us to study proteins that are in the body and how those may differ based on conditions. Markers of the metabolism also. And then also how your genes are expressed, something we call DNA expression, gene expression. And so those all sort of get layered one on top of each other, so it gives us a fuller picture. Nothing works in silo in the body. And so the multi-omics allows us to sort of take all of those pieces and say, okay, what's really going on?
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
So I currently work as a research technician at UW, and then I'm actually going to be starting a PhD program in the fall in
Congrats.
biomedical research. And I was curious to know about your journey with science communication and like what kind of resources have you looked towards to how to communicate your science better to the public? And like what are some of the favorite techniques maybe that you've learned so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't know what I was doing when I became interested in science communication. What I knew was that what I was telling my parents and sisters and aunts about what I did made zero sense to them. In fact, you know, people in my community also thought I studied skin for a very long time. I think my parents thought I could prescribe medicine. I mean, there were just so many things that I think just didn't quite fit. And so I studied YouTube videos and live interviews of people that I thought were really effective communicators. One of the best communicators I thought during COVID is an alum of UW, Jeannie Marazzo. Tony Fauci, another great communicator during COVID. I think there are a lot on social media as well. And I was just very intentional about picking up ways in which they describe things. And so I test those strategies when I give talks. So today was a little bit of a test also. And there are courses that you can take to advance your skills. The Alan Alda School has great courses that you can take that sort of allow you to step out of your shell and take on a little bit of the arts so that you can be freer in how you tell stories and how you describe things. And so there's probably a multitude of things, but I would say that I had a personal motivation so that I could communicate better and more easily with my family. And then separately, have just taken maybe a non-traditional approach, but I think that there are very systematic ways in which you could get training as well.
Okay,
Great
thank you so
question.
much.
Yes, thank you, and good luck to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hidalgo. I have a follow-on to that great question.
Yes.
If you could create a public health communication shop in a school of public health, what would that look like?
Ooh, that's a great question. So it would include media training. When I was a grad student, my mentor came up to my poster at a national meeting and said, "Tell me about your work in 10 seconds." And I was like, I don't even know if I could tell you in 20 minutes. Like, I was so just, but she'd done a lot of media. And when I started doing media myself, what I learned was that you don't have a lot of time to communicate the message that you want to convey. And you have to do it in a way that everyone will understand. And so it takes a lot of time and practice to be able to do that. I have talked about preeclampsia in scientific environments only to this day. And so it takes a lot of practice to get to the point where you can communicate it in a way that people outside of your niche are going to really dive in and be like, yes, I'm sold. I get it. I understand everything you said. So it would include media training. It would include maybe even some writing courses, right? So that you learn how to break down messages. I also think that there should be training in different learning styles, how people take in information. So here, for example, we have the captions that are shown. Some of the print on my slides may have been subject to not being readable due to color blindness or, the font size that I use. So there's a lot that's involved in ensuring that the message that you want to communicate gets across. And so I would say media training, writing workshops, also ensuring that you get feedback on practice, right? So like live practice on being able to communicate your message. And then also a general understanding, we talked about learning styles, but a general understanding of, quite frankly, like how science works. I think sometimes we're so niched in the work that we do that people forget. One thing that I didn't focus on today is that a lot of the work that we have done to date and that's done in this field is not causal work. We don't know that X causes Y. We know that, hey, there might be a relationship, there's a signal that we can follow up on. The trial was an exception, obviously, because that went directly to clinical practice, but a lot of the work that we do, including this test, right, for APOL1 and fetal DNA, really needs a lot of work to be done in order for us to concretely be able to say X causes Y. And as scientists were so ineffective also at communicating uncertainty. And people, by nature, are binary thinkers. Yes, no, alive, dead, right, wrong. And so it's really hard to communicate science when what we're trained to say is maybe or likely or, words that infer a lot of ambiguity. And it's because we can't usually ever be 100% certain about most things. And so there's a real challenge there. Thank you.
Do you have Couple of questions from online.
Oh, great.
I don't remember what this is referring to, but maybe you will. What contributes to the 80% of deaths that are preventable? Is it largely equity access issues?
It is, equity and access issues contribute to a majority of that percentage.
Okay.
And it's things like access to immediate care. So many of you may be aware that a lot of rural hospitals are closing in states all across the country. And so birthing persons are having to travel greater than 30 minutes, sometimes an hour or more, if they have transportation, to be able to get to an emergency room, and the emergency room has to have maternal care available in order for them to receive the care they need. And if it's a high-risk pregnancy, there may not even be someone with the expertise to handle the delivery. And so then therefore they have to be transported to a major medical center, which oftentimes are a major metropolis and to maybe 3 hours away from where people live. And so it's a major, major contributor.
Great, thank you. And another question, are other minority groups at higher risk of preeclampsia, or is it only Black women?
It's primarily Black women. They're at highest risk, yes. As I mentioned, a lot of systemic reasons why Black women are at higher risk, and a lot of the research is asking the question, if we addressed the systematic issues that afflict them particularly, like systemic racism and access and other conditions, just listening and believing women when they say something's not right, would those numbers come down, and would they be more equitable to some of the other race ethnic groups? And we don't have answers for that yet.
Any other questions from the audience?
I mean, I think you said it, but preeclampsia again is you have high blood pressure, you have the pregnancy, birth, whatever, and then you get really bad blood pressure?
Oh, great question. Yes, see, I skipped. I made some assumptions and I skipped steps. So it's a condition that happens at about 20 weeks gestation. And so in the trial, women had mild chronic hypertension and then developed even higher hypertension. And it's really a condition that affects the placenta also during pregnancy, but it can lead to such high blood pressure and protein in the blood that it causes other conditions that lead to maternal morbidity and mortality. But it happens during pregnancy. If it's treated, if it's captured, or if it's caught early and treated, then the person can make it to delivery, right, have the baby, but then they're at risk for high blood pressure after delivery as well, and other adverse outcomes potentially for the baby, like small for gestational age because they had to birth sooner than they were expected. The trial originally tested whether or not treating the mild chronic hypertension was safe. Because until this trial, we didn't know if you could treat safely during pregnancy this mild chronic hypertension. It so happened that some people with mild chronic hypertension developed around the 20-week mark preeclampsia, and then you have all these other outcomes that may happen afterwards. Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yes, in the back.
Here's something for more scientific communication.
Yes.
I work as just a regular therapist, not medical at all, but mostly with pregnant people. And I frequently have people who will remark on a symptom they've had, but they haven't told their doctor because, it's probably nothing.
Yes.
Which means I don't want it to be anything, or they don't want to go in the hospital. So I am frequently wondering, what do I need to be looking for? Because I'm usually the one who ends up pushing them to go tell their doctor.
Yes. So for the audience online, there are situations in which birthing persons may make light of or not take symptoms seriously and not tell their doctors, either because they don't want anything to be wrong or they don't want to have to go into the hospital early especially. There's distrust or mistrust of the system as well, right? There are a number of conditions, but they may be sharing this information with other people. And so then what do we as other people do if information like that is shared? So I would say that one thing to do is avoid Google. I don't know if, what was it, WebMD was like super, like everyone hyperchronically had everything. And so that I would say that if you can identify a trusted medical professional to whom you can refer this individual, that's probably the best case scenario, right? Oftentimes they may trust their person and it just takes a little bit of encouragement, like this is really something that you should consider sharing, and a reminder that it's both for the health of the person but also for the baby, the neonate. And so that could be one strategy, but it is difficult.
And what would I be looking for? I mean, the things that I don't really know all the symptoms, but I hear things about, oh, my vision is just so weird, or, you know, I have this pain in my ankles and I can't walk.
Yeah, so what are you looking for? So that's hard to say because pregnancies are so different for all people, and not all symptoms mean that there is an emergency or something's wrong, right? And so I think the challenge is someone afflicted with these symptoms and has the means and access to go and get regular care, and can go if something is really wrong? Or is it someone that really truly doesn't have access, in which case then there is maybe a little bit more research that needs to happen into understanding what symptoms this person is experiencing. And so I would say in your position as a therapist, while you can't provide medical advice, and I as a genetic epidemiologist cannot do that either, that I think we are all students of science, right? And if we're presented with populations that are hungry for this information potentially, that we can identify evidence and fact-based sources of information. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, for example, is a great resource. And there's information there, maybe even contacts that you can refer them to if they have additional questions. And so if it's not a person, it could be a resource like ACOG. Thank you. Yes?
What are your thoughts on if you're not symptomatic throughout your pregnancy? So in my case, I was diagnosed with preeclampsia at delivery, which
Oh,
was
wow.
really a shock.
Yep.
Because, you know, there's so many things to worry about in pregnancy. So if you don't think something applies to you, then you kind of put it out of your mind.
Yes.
And gloss over maybe the seriousness of some conditions, right? So that's why I was so curious about the epigenome and evaluating risks ahead of time. But it sounds like maybe we're just not there yet.
Yes.
Just wanted to see if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, so the question was, what do you do if you don't find out until really late? In this case, delivery, for example. And is maybe the question what could have been done? Could you have paid closer attention to symptoms? You know, the reality is that oftentimes there are not signs that something is wrong, at least not to even the individual who is living through the experience, right? Biology is so fascinating in that in the case of preeclampsia, it could have been that truly nothing was wrong until the time frame of delivery. And it was at that point that there were conditions in the body with the fetus that led to a diagnosis of preeclampsia. Something that happens also in these spaces is that, and I talked a little bit about this, is that there's a lot of person blaming. And we feel oftentimes as well, I think, very guilty, like I should have listened to myself when this was happening, or I shouldn't have gone on that run, or whatever it is. But really, the timing is just so unpredictable. And I think that's why we're so hopeful that things like epigenetics will allow us to predict even before people consider having babies, because if there are markers in the genetic code that can help us say, hey, you're really at higher risk for this, this is something we should keep an eye on, then you'd have warning maybe even before the pregnancy, right? One of the things that we learned about pregnancy is that folate supplements were really essential for neural tube development. And it was that science that led to the recommendation that these supplements be taken as soon as you're sort of in reproductive age, right? But definitely as soon as you learn that you're pregnant, because it could really lead to preventing bad outcomes for the baby. And so I think similarly here, we're not quite at the place where we can determine if someone's going to have it or not, unfortunately, and it is a devastating condition for some, thankfully treatable, but definitely making advances that again, give me hope. Thank you for sharing your story.
Great. All right. Well, let's give one more round of applause to
Thank
Dr.
you for
Bertha
having
Hidalgo.
me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for being here.
Thanks so much, and safe journeys back to wherever, wherever you came from, and for taking the time to be here in person, online, folks. Thank you for joining us. I know the sun was out today, and it's a rarity in Seattle, so come to Alabama if you want more sun.